Draw this house in the woods with me using markers. In this video, I'm going to be using these colors of alcohol marker, but you can use whatever you like. I'm also using this Copic FINELINER and this white gel pen, but you can use whatever you have on hand. You can see my reference photo on the top left. It is an embroidery that I saw on Facebook, and you can see the original creator there as well. So in this first section, I'm just drawing lightly with my lightest brown, and I'm drawing the branches. I don't want to copy it exactly as I see it. I want to add my own spin to it as well. So you'll see me make my own little changes. Just remember, you don't have to use my exact colors here. You can use whatever colors that you want. Here I'm using browns, greens, and a little bit of blue, but you can use, if you wanted to use grays, or blue, like more blues, whatever you want to use. You don't have to do my exact color scheme. My challenge with this photo is that it's an embroidery, and I really like the embroidery look. So there's a lot of stippling and little tiny dots and little tiny marker lines. So it may seem a little bit tedious, but I really enjoy doing it, and it can be very meditative and methodical if you really take your time and do it right. So here I'm just going in and adding the little branches at the bottom, and I kind of wanted them to look like they were dangling a little bit more rather than growing out. So almost like it's sitting on something and the vines are sort of dangling. So you'll see me make adjustments like that throughout. And I know this isn't a typical tutorial in the traditional sense of the word, but I feel like this sketch was a little bit chaotic. So adding the color was a little chaotic. So now I'm going in with my lightest green and adding some foliage and just sort of stippling in some leaves here and there. It will build on itself as I add more color, so I'm not worried at this point about making it too perfect. I just want it to look good. And the beautiful thing about alcohol markers is if you don't treat them like it has to be a perfect drawing, you can have a lot of fun with it. I find I have a lot more fun when I'm not so worried about exact perfect blending or perfect marker strokes, if I just let it be a little bit chaotic. So here you'll see me outlining. I'm just leaving a space for that house because I want it to be a white. So I'm just leaving negative space. The house is going to be not super defined. It's just going to be sort of tucked into the woods there. And then I'm outlining my section. So if you look at the reference photo, you can see there are a couple of different, what I call sections or shapes in the bottom. So I'm just going in and sort of filling in those spaces and outlining where I want things to go, and adding a little bit of foliage here and there. The first layer in any piece of artwork, and I think most artists can agree that this feels like the case, the first layer is always kind of ugly. Like, you have to sort of trust the process and build up your layers as you go. And with alcohol markers, the general rule is very similar to watercolor, where you have to start with your lightest colors. Whereas if you're painting in something like acrylic or paint markers, you usually start with your darker colors and you build up your lighter colors on top of your dark. So you can see now that I've grabbed a sort of yellowy green. So the first color was a light green. Now I'm adding some more yellowy foliages. And I like to do this when I'm doing anything natural. I like to have a variety of different tones because when you're out in nature, you'll see a variety of different like cooler tones and warmer tones. It's not always the same color, so I like to replicate that in my art. So I just added a couple more branches, and now I'm going in with a darker green and sort of defining my section. So what I'm trying to do is define where each section will start and layering in where the darkest areas will go. So when I do any sort of alcohol marker art, I do the larger area in a light color, and then I'll do sort of half or 2/3 of the color in a darker tone, like a mid-tone, and then, you know, my darkest areas will be my darkest colors, obviously. But you'll see that I'll add sort of like a third of the way is the darkest colors. I hope that makes sense. Basically, you can see that I'm not going all the way up to the edge of the lightest color. And I also want the lightest color to show through in some areas. So now I'm stippling in some foliage. And partway through this project, I decided that I wasn't going to totally stipple, but I also wanted to make it more of a marker project where I would have marker strokes instead of just all dots and stippling like the embroidery image that you see. So now you can see that I've sort of switched to doing little marker strokes instead of stippling, and I like it a lot better. It's more, for lack of a better term, markery. So now I'm going in again with that marker. What I did was I let it dry for a couple of minutes. Alcohol marker dries really fast, so I don't need that long. And then I go back in with the same color to deepen some of that color and add another layer. And I'm adding some more foliage, some stipples, and some marks. And I'm trying to make it look unsymmetrical. Whenever I do anything in nature, I kind of don't want it to be symmetrical because nature is very rarely symmetrical. So I'm stippling around and just kind of clumping areas together in a sort of chaotic way. I hope that makes sense. I know it's kind of hard to explain. And then I'm adding some stippling towards the bottom on those vines that are sort of hanging, but I want some of the brown to stick out as well. So I'm not covering the entire branches, and I'm just sort of going in with a little bit of random foliage there. So now I'm going to grab my next lightest brown color. So I'm adding more definition to my little sections that I mentioned earlier, and just sort of chaotically putting in some more natural areas. So as if the dirt is sort of poking through, and if some, you know, brown foliage or dead foliage or some of the branches are sticking through, and just making sure that you can see, you know, the branches and the foliage in a more natural state. I'm trying to explain it, but I know it sounds kind of chaotic. I'm darkening up some of my branches, but I also want to leave some areas lighter, so as if the light is sort of peeking through some of those branches. So next up is my darkest green, and I do end up using some darker colors than this, but this is my darkest sort of regular green color. And I'm defining those little sections so that the darkest areas of my sketch that you can see in the reference photo are more defined. And just trying to make it blend, but also I don't like to actually do traditional blending with alcohol markers. I like to do more marker stroke. So you'll see me doing little marker strokes, and I'll do my version of blending. So the last color I used was more of a brown green, and now I'm going in with a sort of warm, like a bluish green, to give it a little more dimension. Like I mentioned before, I like to have a variety of warm and cool tones when I'm doing something natural, because I don't know, some people say that you should have all one tone, but I like the variety of different tones, especially in nature. So I'm doing the same thing, lots of stippling, some marker strokes, and defining sections. And then I will go in with a different color. Next, I'm using a really dark brown, and this is where you'll start to see the contrast coming in. When you're doing any sort of artwork, it's really the contrast of the lights and the darks that make an image pop, in my opinion. I think in a lot of artists' opinion, but that's kind of the difference between decent art and, well, I guess I'm not an expert on what's good art and what's bad art, but in my opinion, when I look at art and there's a lot of contrast, I like it a lot more than when there isn't contrast. So let's put it that way. So now I'm just adding some contrast, and I'm defining those sections a little bit more and adding sort of the base area of where my dark shadows will be. and then I'll go in with another dark color. It might seem a little counterintuitive, but I go in with some dark blue just to deepen the cool tones and the natural tones and add some windows to my house. All these are just little tiny strokes. And to finish off my sketch, I'm going in with some teal. This is like a dark teal. It's like sort of a blue-green color, but a darker version. And I'm going to add my version of blending. So it's just stippling upward or downward, depending on which way that I want it to go, to sort of blend the darkest colors into the lightest colors. So now you'll see me grab sort of mid-tone. This is a mid-tone teal kind of color, so it's a green-blue. Now it doesn't have to be a perfect green-blue. And then I'm going in with my my brown green. I know I'm throwing a lot of colors at you, but going in with a brown green just to sort of fix up those colors. I'm just adding some final touches, adding a few little darker spots where I want them to go. So stippling and adding some marker strokes in those sections. Some of these marker colors I didn't use a ton, and if you really look, it's like you can't even see that they're there. But I'm just adding a little bit of definition to my foliage and just making sure that there's enough dark in this sketch, because I felt like it just wasn't quite dark enough for my liking. The original image I'm using has quite a bit of dark areas. I didn't want that much dark, but I do want a good contrast. So going in again with some darker colors, and then I will use this is a micron pen actually that I'm using. At the beginning I said it was going to be a Copic, but it's actually a micron pen that I use. Doesn't really matter as long as you're using a fine liner. And then I'll go in with my white gel pen, and the original image doesn't have this, so this is sort of where I'm adding my own take on it as well. I like to add a little white flowers, it sort of gives it a little bit of, makes the contrast stand out a little bit in my opinion. And I really do like adding little white dot flowers to everything. I don't know why, I don't know what that's about, but I tend to do that in a lot of my sketches or paintings or whatever. And you can do this with a paint pen if you have a paint pen, or just anything that is thicker that's going to sit on top of the color. There's no alcohol marker that you can do this with because alcohol marker is translucent, so that's why I'm using a gel pen. But I also do tend to use paint pens for this as well. And then we're all done, and we can take a look at our final piece now. So let me know what you think, and if you tried this yourself, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Bye for now.